Thanks, Sharon and Shannon, for inviting me. Thanks to Michelle and Marley from Opportunity Child for hosting me, and thanks to Carrie Graham, who works out of Sydney with Collaboration for Social Impact, for inviting me to come back to Australia again. It's my second time. I was here last year in May, and there's a whole bunch of reasons I'm happy to come back. First of all, I live in Western Canada, and it's the end of winter. And so there's nothing like getting out of Dodge in March in Western Canada when the streets are brown from gravel and nothing is green yet, and it's been a long winter. So on a very superficial level, you have a climate refugee here. On another level, I never had a desire to come to Australia, not because I didn't think it was great, but I thought I have a short life, and Australia is going to just have nicer weather and cooler accents than Canada. So, you know, if it wasn't a priority on my list, but boy, have I ever been wrong. I so enjoy coming here. In fact, the first time I was here, Leanne, my wife said, tell me what it's like and don't go on and on. And I said, you know, when you have a bite of something really sweet and it's so sweet your taste buds hurt? And she said, yeah. And I said, that's what Australia is. It's so great. I just really thoroughly enjoy being here. And I like this topic. I've been working like you on this vexing issue of how do we shape, not endure our futures. And I'm actually from rural Alberta. I know what it's like to live in rural regions. And it's been kind of a preoccupation for a lot of my life, and more recently a vocation. So I'm just thrilled to be able to spend time with people who do that kind of work, and happy to share, knowing that that's my Trojan horse. I share because I mostly get to then experience what you guys are doing. So I've already learned a ton about what's going on in the world here for you guys, and am really, as last year, learning a lot from Opportunity Child in general, and hopefully you guys specifically. So we don't have a lot of time today, right? Originally we had talked about going till 9 p.m. No, I know we have till noon. That's right. We'll work on Alberta time. So we have 4 things that I thought were really helpful for sharing, and I'll share with those things with you why shortly, and we'll have a little bit of small group work. Before we do that, why don't we do this? Rather than actually go into a big who's here kind of thing, because many of you know each other already, why don't you just turn to the people at your tables, and this is where you might have to scooch on a table. Thank you. And then maybe just have this conversation, because it's a metaphor for why we do this work in general. You could have been somewhere else today. You're busy. You mentioned that. There's lots of things on your plate. You thought this was the best use of your time. So just tell your neighbor why it was important for you to come here today. Okay, we'll just spend 2-3 minutes doing that. Just get you going again. You could have been somewhere else. You came here. How come? All right, everyone. Thanks for doing that. I always find that kind of, it's just a simple exercise, but just when we're busy, we make choices about where to spend our time, and you've chosen to spend a couple hours here, so we hope will eventually be a good use of your time. I'm going to just spend a couple minutes sharing my background with you so you have a sense of where these ideas come from, and it might explain why I think they're important. It may not, but that should only take a couple of minutes. I grew up in northern Alberta. My family came over from Eastern Europe in the 1920s. So we've been around for 90 years. Alberta only was established in 1905. Very French town, Francophone town, amongst 4 First Nations, Northern Plains Cree First Nations. So 3 treaties in Alberta. They're the Cree Treaty. Multi-ethnic, diverse kind of town, frontier types mentality, heavy farming, and some mining and forestry. Grew up and did lots of stuff when I was a kid. Human services, failed at most of them. I did employment development for youth. I worked in a friendship center. We did a boys and girls club. I was Northern Alberta's worst social worker. I was told as much. And even had a failed stint working in criminal justice in a minimum security prison, which is a real good story. And that ended my my thought that I could be a good frontline worker, but felt pretty conversant in what it was like to do that stuff. In 1989, I finished a degree at University of Alberta, and I went to Eastern Europe to study solidarity. You guys remember solidarity? Poland? Yeah. Solidarność? My background is Polish, so I spoke a bit of Polish, and ended up going 3 weeks before I arrived. I did my thesis on solidarity, and the movement I wanted to study became government. And so about 5 months after I got there, that's me, 4th from the left, we were on the Berlin Wall. I'd love to tell you stories about it, but I don't remember much. No one remembers much about that weekend. It was a party, and it was terrific because soon after that I decided to stay, and I ended up lucking out and working with United Nations Development Program, the World Bank, Price Waterhouse, Coopers, but then it was just Price Waterhouse, and ended up managing international development funds to the Ministry of Regional Economic Development, where I became really interested on how things get done regionally and locally. I buzzed off back to Canada in the mid-90s to get a grad degree, hoping to go back. I met my future wife, who refused to marry me, so I had to lay siege to her for her to say yes. Ended up missing my window to go back to Eastern Europe, but I landed with a very large nonprofit organization called CODA. And CODA was the Community Opportunities Development Association, and they were considered one of the premier employment community economic development groups in Canada. They had micro-enterprise development, social enterprises, went into downsizing companies, did job search counseling, etc. And my job was actually to do an overall effectiveness and cost-benefit analysis, which I wanted to do because I was had seen lots of evaluations that were done poorly, and I thought, might as well stop complaining about it and go see what it's like to do an assessment. We did something called a jury assessment, which not many people do because it's pretty dicey, but boy, is it ever a riot. And the jury assessment actually is you come up with a claim. CODA is overall quite effective and has an excellent cost benefit. You state that. And then you have 2 sides with evaluators on either side who argue both sides of the story, bringing data to bear. It's a kick in the butt to bring data to a conversation. So, and if you can keep the container on so people don't take it entirely too seriously, it can generate some pretty interesting insights. So we did that for 2 days. We had a jury of people who were expert in this area from across North America, and at the end of the 2 days, they said something that was really important. Number 1, we think you're one of the strongest human service delivery organizations we've ever seen. That felt pretty good, right? So we were all they were all happy about that. And then they said, but we don't think you believe in your mission or your strategy anymore. We don't think you're interested in only in helping people find jobs, because 1 out of 2 people who are poor now actually have jobs, right? They're working part-time or patching together income. We think you're interested in poverty. And we don't think you believe human services is the only way to turn needles on things. We think your ambition is now to turn needles, but you think you have to use an entirely different approach, which they didn't use the word then, but it was really collective impact. That was big because the summary of the report is doing things right, but not necessarily doing the right things. Make sense? Right? Doing good human service delivery. So in fact, that triggered a big change in the organization. They merged with an even larger human service delivery organization and created a new thing called OP2000, which nowadays we would call a collective impact backbone. This was 1996. And the idea was we were going to reduce poverty dramatically in Waterloo region to the lowest level of Canada in 4 years. It's already quite a rich region. It's the home of the blackberry, if you remember that historical artifact, the blackberry rim. So high tech, it's our little Silicon Valley, but we thought we could do it in 4 years. It was almost a different project though, because right before we handed in the proposal, I had written, we looked at it and we actually realized that with an hour and a half to go, we were asking for several $1 million to do a very large poetry reduction project. Right? Someone had put check all, so we actually, I was flipping through the document, we had the economic cost of poetry in Waterloo region, and we had case studies of people living in deep poetry. And if we could just reduce poetry, would Waterloo region not be a great place to live? That was our strategy. So we fixed it. And ended up having a great campaign where, and when I look back upon it in retrospect, we had an excellent, very sophisticated backbone. We had excellent players. We had secondments from the private sector, the public sector, the nonprofit sector. Our backbone was full of secondments. I was the lead of that. And we were located in a high-tech enterprise because we were saying everyone's challenge is to move these needles. And we had, I would say, is a relatively weak strategy, but generated some pretty good outcomes. I wish we would have had more time, and I want to talk about that as one of our lessons today. That went so well that in the year 2000, after the campaign, which almost brought us to the lowest level of poverty, the needles moved. Some of it was due to us, some of it was bigger historical contextual forces. We were asked by Alan and Judy Broadman to create the Tamarack Institute, and they're a very rich family out of Toronto, whose family motto is, we make money in the morning and we give it away in the afternoon. Nice family, eh? They won the Order of Canada, they're very generous. They fund a bunch of different things, and they actually funded the Tamarack Institute with the following mission. Communities are wrestling with complex issues that we have always wrestled with. But we've actually forgotten as communities how to tackle complex issues on our own, and have often said external forces will take care of it. Senior levels of government, or let the free market rip and something good will come from that. We actually don't believe that's the case anymore. We are seeing so many communities trying to self-correct, to remember what it was like to shape, not endure their future, but also have to build new kind of machinery in the 21st century, because it's 21st century complexity we're dealing with, not 19th century, 18th century. So a lot of what we know, we actually have to remember some of it, but we have to invent new ways of taking care of ourselves. So they said, your mission is simple. Go watch what communities are doing, find patterns, and feed it back. Try and reduce communities' learning curve. Look at innovators, create practices that the early adopters can more easily absorb, and just facilitate or support or contribute to this process of self-correction.
And so who was funding that?
Alan and Judy Broadbent, yeah, this benefactor. We had to raise our own money as a national level institute, but they were the original grant, a 10-year commitment. Thanks, guys. That's all I really had to say, so I appreciate you coming. No, I've got more. So that's the background. And so we ran a collective impact effort for 10 years called Vibrant Communities. I was the ED of that, where we looked at 15 urban collaboratives trying to reduce poverty with what we would now call a collective impact framework. And just as we were winding down in 2011, John Kanye and Mark Kramer wrote that article. And we said, hey, we had some language for this. Their language is better. You know, sure, we'll be collective impact. And started to absorb that language. I left around then because I was interested in not growing the network even further. I wanted to run back into the weeds to watch what communities were doing, so my mind was a bit clearer. And not managing an initiative, I wanted to be in communities watching them. So I have an associate status now until I choose to return back and do leadership stuff. That's a long history, but it contains some of the seeds of what I wanted to share with you, because if I were to actually give this another title, this project, I would call it Second Mouse Gets the Cheese. You don't find that funny? You guys are a tough crowd. Early bird gets the worm. Early bird gets the worm, second mouse gets the cheese. If we were to do all this again, there's lots of things I wish we would have known, particularly me as executive director, but here's 4 things that I wish we would have known early and had clear in our head, because it would have freed us up to deal with different kinds of problems, right? And different kinds of challenges. The challenges never go away in this work, but it's nice to knock some of them off, or at least, you know, make them not so challenging, so we can kind of work on different ones. Any questions before I begin? I'd summarize a lot of how we're dealing with complex issues right now. This guy was just incredible for things like this, eh? We're kind of lost, we don't want to work, but we're making pretty good time. We're busy. Who feels like they're not busy? We're busy, right? We're like, my friend from Texas says, I'm busier than a one-legged man in a butt-kinking contest. Right, we're busy. So it's not as if we're not busy. And if busy got was the key ingredient to change, we have solved most issues. Part of it is because we are learning how to navigate complexity, and we're learning what it's like to be highly experimental again. Here's my second in my series of quotes by dead white guys. Franklin D. Roosevelt, I love this one. The country needs, and unless I mistake its temper, the country demands bold, persistent experimentation. It is common sense to take a method and try it. If it fails, admit it frankly and try another. But above all, try something. Collective impact, this language that was given to us in 2011, is an extraordinarily good bet. The why of collective impact, as we're going to see right away, is clear. It's absolutely clear. The how is what we're working on. There is no orthodoxy yet in collective impact. There's some very good ideas and some emerging patterns of practice. But there is, and because there's no orthodoxy, there's no heresy yet. Right? It's not as if we're missing stuff. We might be making mistakes, for sure, but it's not as if we're having fidelity problems to the original formula. There's no formula yet. There's a very clear sense of the general direction and parameters for our work, but like it or not, you're still part of this big group of innovators. There's some early adoption, but we're still making stuff up and trying quickly to learn from these early pioneers, but we are still inventing. The invention is not complete. Who's bummed out by that? Come on. Some people go, oh, I wish we would have just give us the recipe.
It's not necessarily something to be bummed out about. It's kind of exciting too that we're still in the forefront of that kind of activity. So.
It is exciting. In fact, with opportunity.
I mean, it'd be nice for you to be able to turn around and give us all the answers and tell us what we need to do. That'd be great. But I think that it's kind of nice to be part of the journey.
I think it's very hard to be part of a framework that doesn't have rules and structures and, we're not doing that, we're not doing it right.
It is hard. How about something between rules, something about good framing patterns and principles, but all communities, here's a formula for you. C plus M equals O. Context plus mechanism or approach gives you outcomes. Same approach in different contexts has to be adapted and will generate different outcomes. So all these work is context sensitive. What's your neighboring town here? The one that we just came through. Yeah, do things happen differently over there?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely, right? So we take a general sense of direction and some general principles and pattern that are emerging, and then we have to adopt and adapt them to suit local context. That's why so many cookie cutter things don't work, and we're going to talk about that shortly. I agree. Okay. Here's the 4 things I'm going to say. The first couple are going to be relatively quick. They might be reminders. Almost everything I'm about to say, none of it is counterintuitive, but it is countercultural. Meaning when you see it, you're going to go, well, that makes sense. But the problem is it's countercultural in that we don't work in systems that privilege this stuff. So a lot of collective impact is a hard row. It's like, do you have salmon here? It's like salmon swimming upstream. Lots of, it seems like a frickin' lot of work. And part of it is because we're not working in an environment that enables it. We're swimming upstream. Doesn't mean it's wrong, and doesn't mean everything in the ecology in which we work is wrong. It just means it's not necessarily easy. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. You probably have heard that phrase. We work in cultures that we have to adapt. Here's the 4 big ideas. Sharon, have you ever done some, you've not done stuff on complex versus simple?
We have, but not for everyone who's in this room.
I'll do a quick version.
We've done the sort of, the Knaman, the simple,
yes.
complicated.
Yes. Okay, we'll do a slight version of that. We want to argue that we have to acknowledge the difference between simple and complex things. We have to. These issues you're dealing with are not simple issues on steroids. Number 1, in fact, my dad knew that. My dad was the superintendent of schools, and my sister's a principal, and we talk about this stuff all the time, right? They work in education, which has got a real fetish for best practices, and there are lots of best practices, but they always say it fails on the rocks of complexity, right? Because they work in complex environments. So we want to make this distinction. We want to say a little bit more about what we're learning about adaptive responses to complex issues. Number 3, I want to give you just, I know we're not going to spend literally more than 90 seconds on the key features of collective impact, but I want to tell you 3 stories of collective impact, some that work, some that don't, and then get into this last thing, which I think is the biggest learning that we've had around any effort to try and tackle something, that in fact, contradicts a little bit the FSG framework on the phases of collective impact. We work lots with FSG, and John Kanya, Mark Kramer, we think this is wrong, that the 4-phase is wrong. I think, and it actually it puts us in a little prison, makes us prisoner to a linear thing, which doesn't work. We think this adaptive cycle thing releases a lot more ingenuity and frees us up to be a lot more inventive and still meets the principles of collective impact. So this is really the big in-closing show. I'm going to make those 4 points. We'll have little conversations for each of them, and at the end we'll ask the question, so what, if anything, does this mean for your good work here? Sound okay? I'm exhausted just telling you about it. Let's get into it. Okay. Oh, can't see that yet. Let's do this in a group. Well, no, you'll do it in your tables. You've already got a little bit of connection here. What's the difference between baking a cake, sending a rocket to the moon, and raising a child? What's the difference between those 3 things? Think like a leader or manager. Those are 3 different enterprises. What's different amongst them? By the way, there's no right answer to this. It's meant to evoke some thinking.
We talked about baking a cake and the rocket ship one they're both fairly simple in terms of, it's not necessarily simple to get rockets to the moon, but there's probably a fairly succinct set of rules you've got to follow to make it happen.
That's right.
And also it's very easy to tell if you've done it wrong. Your rocket ship crashes, your cake flops, whatever, it's really easy to see whether you've done it right or wrong. Raising a child, there's so many external influences, there's so many different variations on how you can do it, and it's much harder to measure whether you've been successful or not.
Very nice. It's such a productive riddle because I learn something every time someone answers it. Yeah, it's not clear to know when you're done or what's success. Anyone else have a riff on this that they'd like to share?
Also followed a very similar path that we talked about. The cake recipe you could probably do on your own.
Yeah.
That there is a recipe, and that if you get it right, you can repeat that.
Right.
The rocket ship, you probably need a group. There's recipe. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But as you said, you know when you've done it right or wrong. But for the child, it takes a village to raise a child.
Terrific.
There is no rules, and there's no recipe, and it's not repeatable. So what works for one child is not going to work for another. That's the continuum we talked about.
You should be doing this workshop. That's exactly this metaphor, which is not mine, it's Brenda Zimmerman's. In the book Getting to Maybe, here's a summary of it. Baking a cake is what we just talked about. This is the zone of best practice, right? Where there is a recipe that has been tried and tested multiple different times. It's been tested enough that it generally, if you follow it with high fidelity, you will get predictable results in a predictable fashion, right? That is the zone of best practice. Doesn't necessarily require a ton of expertise, although I can prove that wrong. But if you have high fidelity to the recipe, you get an outcome. Complicated is a little bit different. Complicated is, you're right, the degree of, it's more than recipe-ish. You can't actually say, here's a recipe to sending a rocket to the moon. It requires a ton of expertise. There is a solution. If you get the right expertise in the room working together long enough, they'll find more than one solution. Formula are there, coordination of expertise is important, and you can dramatically improve the probabilities that you get a good outcome, but that is, as you noted, not always guaranteed. Raising a kid is different. I know some people already have children here. Who has children? Okay. Who has a strategic plan for their children?
You mean one that they're
Yeah. There's always a couple people say, I had one. Yeah. Why don't you have a plan or recipe for your kids? They don't stick to the rules.
They don't learn to read early enough to follow.
That's true. Their literacy rates are really low for the first couple of years. They just learn by doing.
You need them to abide by.
Can they develop at different rates?
Well, let's do this. You don't have rules, but does anyone have kind of some principles or some general ideas or guidelines about how they deal with it? Yeah? Yeah, guidelines.
And I think that was the difference, that in raising a child, your values and possibly community values will come into how you want to do it.
That's right.
It doesn't sort of.
That's true. Highly values driven. Not necessarily recipe-oriented, maybe guideline. Who's got 2 kids? Who treats them exactly the same? Nope, kids differ in complex issues. Issues and context differ. What works in one situation doesn't work in another. Who's got a set of guidelines that have worked for a while and then they don't? Yeah? Why? Everything changes. They change, you change, your relationship changes. Right? I got a 14-year-old boy. I'm watching it change right in front of me. Right? He's now quite independent. I was just saying he's into gridiron now. He just got on the team. Boom, boom, boom. Our relationship's changing. I've changed. I'm more relaxed. Right? He's changed. So things are always adopting over time. Who feels that you could do everything right in raising a child and the unpredictability of the outcome remains?
Yep.
Right? Who feels you could do almost everything wrong with raising a child and something still may come good, something good may come from it, right? Isn't that when you're raising a child, and we're going to get into this now, we don't get guaranteed outcomes. All you do is get to maybe. We dramatically improve the probabilities that we get to maybe. Still means we judge ourselves pretty harshly and are concerned about this, but the unpredictability of the outcome remains. But we can improve probabilities. Here is a slightly different version of this. This little initiative, this framework is kind of like Cynefin. Have you seen this one before? Stacy, should I go through this?
I don't know that everybody in the room would have. It would be more the team.
I will do it fairly quickly then. This actually is kind of like Cynefin. The difference with this and Cynefin is this has the dimension of agreement, which Cynefin doesn't have. And I think it's useful to have because we're working with values in communities and different interests. When this is about certainty, the degree to which we understand the nature of a problem, what its root causes are, where the leverage points are, what strategies we might employ, and the predictability of the outcomes. When we have that all really well, that's high certainty. When we say, I don't even really understand what this thing is, I don't know what the root causes are, I can't tell you what the strategies are, and heaven forbid I pretend I know what the outcomes are. That's low certainty. Agreement is where the people who have to be involved in the problem solving are on the same page or not. When they are on the same page, it's high agreement. Same values, same interests, same positions, usually same worldview. When they're not on the same page, different values, interests, and position, and usually when you have diversity, you have agreement issues. 4 different kinds of issues. This is bake in the cake country. High agreement, high certainty, this is the zone of best practice. High fidelity to the practice, find the right recipe and follow it. Who's a best practice junkie? Yeah. I love best practice. I love it. When you can find it, you get it. You take it. There's lots of best practices in the world, but they should be context. They should be able to work the same in every different context. Sending a rocket to the moon. Anyone see Apollo 13, the movie? Remember that one scene where they need a couple more hours of oxygen and they come into a room and they throw a dozen things on the table and they said, get these astronauts 2 more hours of oxygen. It's something like that. Right? Who's in the room? It's not non-experts. It's people who know that stuff, right? Give it to the experts in a complicated situation. How about this one? This is where people are not on the same page. The issue of what the issues are and how to get an outcome or the effects of different interventions, that's not in question, but can you get people to get on the same page? You don't have this issue probably in the same way, but right now in Canada the big thing is safe injection sites for heavy drug users, particularly on the east side of Vancouver. We know what safe injection sites can do and what they can't do. The science is clear on that. Can you get people to agree on whether or not to employ it? No, not in Canada anyways. What would some of the issues be?
They're going to influence community. They're going to bring attract.
There might be, this is just sheer interest. I might say philosophically I have no problem, but not in my backyard. I want my property values to say hi. What if you were actually, you may have some values issues around that. This is why Cynefin, I think we should adapt Cynefin because we deal with agreement issues as much as anything. Whether or not to employ a living wage campaign in the United States. The data around municipalities requiring subcontractors to pay living wages, the data is pretty good on that. We just can't get municipalities to agree whether or not to require that of subcontractors. Right? There's politics involved. Okay. How about this one? Top of the right, off the charts. Some issues are so off the chart on certainty and so off the chart on agreement that they're chaotic. And the traditional response to chaos is massive avoidance. I don't want to deal with it. Like global warming for quite some time. Just don't want to deal with it. Don't understand it. Don't want to deal with it. And sometimes you can't help but deal with it, such as when the earthquakes hit Haiti and we had all the water systems went out. That was chaos, right? No one knows what's going on. We don't know. People are on the same page fighting, etc. How about a nonprofit? Anyone ever work in a nonprofit where the executive director leaves and you got 3 weeks of money left in the bank and payroll coming? I was. That was chaos. Right? So what do you do in chaos? The first thing, this is sort of emergency preparedness stuff, you create stability fast. Almost command and control. Who's doing what? Get me the best data. Open up communication channels. Start building capital, like phone in the bank. How much do we owe you? Do we have to pay the receiver general first? Et cetera, et cetera. Find out as much stuff. And then, once you stabilize the situation, use the opportunity to create innovation so it doesn't happen again. Right? So what did we do in our nonprofit after that happened to us? You can predict. What was where was our financial controls? What do they look like? Let's beef those up. Who's on our board again? How come no one can read these bloody statements? Can we get someone a little bit more obsessive about admin matters as the next ED? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So in Haiti, they created a redundant water system. So not if, but when the next earthquake hits, we're ready for that. Last one, guys. The zone of complexity. The zone of wicked issues where cause and effect, the nature of the problems and what may or may not work, that's not clear, and stakeholders are not necessarily clear. This is collective impact country. This requires adaptive responses, which are participatory, systemic, and experimental. We're going to go into that soon. These issues are not simple issues on steroids. They require different kinds of responses that we're going to get to right away. And the key of this diagram is the following. Most of the community issues are actually splattered all over this. Right? Some of your issues are technical. Hey, Flint, Michigan. Do you know the story of Flint, Michigan in the news lately? Lead poisoning in the water supply. Right? So let's do an analysis. Lead poisoning in the water supply. Sounds kind of technical. So our first run at it might be, hey, it's the engineers kind of, something happened with the engineers. Keep pulling away the onion. What do we know about Flint, Michigan? The town has been having its rear end kicked for 40 years. Everything that can go wrong is going wrong in that town, right? There's corruption issues, there's management issues, they're not getting money from the state. It's a complex issue. There's a whole bunch of things going on. Is this feeling okay, guys? Yeah? Issues are all over the place. These boundaries are permeable. Nothing ever fits nicely into one. And the key here is we need situational leadership. Different kinds of things require different kinds of responses. When I go back on the plane to Canada, I don't want the pilots to treat that like a complex issue. Hey, let's try this. Who wants to come up here and try this out, right? Woo, what does this do? We want them to treat it like a complicated issue. They're experts. They know how to fly the plane. On the other hand, we don't want to treat our simple issues like complex issues like simple issues on steroids. I'll end with this little joke, and then we'll see if it means something to you. Jack is in a parking lot on his hands and knees under a big lamp looking for something. Jill walks by and says, "What are you looking for?" He says, "I lost my car keys." "I'll help you," she says. And she gets down on her hands and knees and begins to look. They look for an hour. At one point, Jill gets up and says, "Jack, we've looked all over the place here. I can't find them. Where did you say you lost them? You lost them again?" And Jack gets up and, not even in a kind of very concerned way, stretches and he points to a dark side of the parking lot and says, "I lost them over there." And she responds quickly, "Well, why are we looking over here?" And he says, "There's a lot more light over here." You guys are a tough crowd. Okay. I like that because I actually think the way we are trained and funded and resourced and structured and organized, boom, 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 boom. Our ecology says, here's where the light is. Our car keys on complex issues are over there. Why do we not do collective impact naturally? Why do we not be inventive and participatory, etc.? Because it's the dark side of the parking lot. We can do it tremendously well. Part of our challenge is breaking away from these patterns and feeling comfortable in that one. We'll leave it there. I'm just going to stop here, let you guys chat a little bit, and then see if there's some questions. I think this is foundational. The ability to make a distinction between simple, complicated, and complex, and what it means for our leadership and management. If we don't do this well, we're going to look at collective impact as simple issues on steroids. We're going to plan, pretend we know what's going on all the time, create enormous complex plans that implode under their own weight, etc. So I think the sensitivity to this is foundational. You may disagree. Take a couple minutes. What, if anything, does this diagram reveal to you about your work here in Goldfield? Okay. I don't think there's anything counterintuitive about this. This is really a sensitizing framework to something I think we all know. But does looking at the lens of your work through this reveal anything different? Like, is there something that's new, or is it just an affirmation of what you already know?
Yeah, it kind of made us realise why we're magnetized to the light. Go back to the light.
Yeah.
And a sense of we can make a change there, so, and our resourcing can stay there. And we know there's some certainty in our answers, so it's to continually drive us back from not knowing what change or how to measure what's in the dark side.
In the dark side. And as we're going to say right away, I want to say there is a form of, this is not ill-disciplined work. There's discipline in this arena of work. It just doesn't look like discipline and accountability in these areas. It differs a bit. Yeah. Good, thanks. Any other comments? No? Okay, we're going to move on then. So complex issue require adaptive responses. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I do want to say that we've been saying complex for a while, but do we know what that means for leadership and management? So the nice thing is we're beginning to be a bit more clear about what does that look like. So like diagnosing something as complex, one thing, but how do we navigate that? Here again, guys, the good news is we know how to do this. I'm going to say complex issues require adaptive responses, and it has 3 characteristics, and I'm going to tell one or two stories that illustrate this entire thing. Then we're going to go into collective impact, which requires adaptive leadership. Adaptive responses are participatory. There's 3 reasons to be authentically participatory and engaged community in this work, even though it's way easier not to. It's actually a pain in the ass to work with community, right? I'm from community, I've worked with community. Whenever people say it, my anxiety levels go up because it's work, but it is worth the effort, and we are good at it. Number 1, we need 360-degree intelligence on these issues, particularly with those with lived experience. If we don't have it, we're hooped. We are not going to see it all. This is evidenced by a pretty simple story from Dallas, Texas, where the police department came to the public health department and says, we've been tracking the number of recent Mexican immigrants who are not using car seats for their kids. It's a problem. Could you do something about it? The experts in the public health department took off and created a social marketing campaign which included subsidized car seats for recent immigrants who didn't have a lot of money, and they won awards for it. The police came back 1 year later and said, thanks for the program, the needle hasn't moved. In fact, it got worse. So what did they do? They actually went to the community and they said, hey, we didn't involve you in the first round. Here's the nature of the challenge. How would you improve the number of car seats being used? They played with it a little bit, and then the solution they came up with, someone said, get the bishop to bless the seats. Now, why didn't the public health department come up with that? They wouldn't have known. Yeah, you're right, sure. How would they know that stuff? How are we supposed to know most of this stuff? We didn't live that experience. We're not from that. That's a cultural trigger. Guess how many car seats are left in that warehouse that they bought? None. Right? Boom. 7-Elevens, remember those things used to get knocked off all the time? Guess how they stopped getting knocked off? One of the primary reasons. 7-Eleven went to prison and did focus groups with people who used to knock off 7-Elevens and said, what would you do different? How would you design the store differently? So they said, we're going to bring the cashiers closer to the window. We're going to say hi to people when they walk in. We're going to only have $50 in the safe, and we're going to go collect money every X number of hours, etc., etc., etc. The cumulative effect wasn't silver bullets, it was silver buckshot. that all these little things led to dramatic reductions. There is story after story after story about the power of first voice and the need for 360-degree intelligence. It's a pain in the butt, but we need it. Number two, we need it because over the long run, if things catch fire in the community, if the resilience and the ownership are worth it, because that will last longer than the commitment of any external party, organization. Anyone ever work with an external party that's quite supportive of it and for no fault of their own sometimes gets pulled away? Usually it's state and federal government or Commonwealth government. Not always. I actually had that metaphor. Someone says, we're with you, we're with you. Hey, look at that squirrel. And they take off. They're doing something else. I realized this when we were in the Regina working on a neighborhood change project, and our national magazine, Maclean's, had an article said, North Central Regina, the worst city neighborhood in Canada. So I'm thinking, oh gosh, everyone's going to bolt, right? It's going to be grumpy, things are going to fall to pieces. We went there 3 days later for a pre-scheduled conference. The parking lot was full. There was rock and roll music on the inside. The playground is full of kids, and walked in the gym and people had t-shirts on, we're number one. Great, eh? Inner city of Regina, keeping the suburbs safe. And I thought, my gosh, we're already feeling nervous because of one article. They ain't moving. They love this community. They're going to stay. So issue number two, ownership and resiliency. The third one is actually just a plain values-based argument, and it comes from the Polish Constitution, which of course we all know from 1541. Nic o nas bez nas. Nothing about us without us. If it's about us, we deserve to be involved. Make sense? Ownership, 360-degree intelligence, and just normal values, social justice. These two things, systemic zooming in and zooming out, and experimental, all captured in one story. Anyone know Surrey, British Columbia? Has anyone been to Vancouver? Yeah, so Vancouver, the Manhattan side of Vancouver, downtown is one thing, but it's surrounded by all these large urban areas. And one of them is called Surrey. It's about 600,000 people, fastest growing municipality in Western Canada, but it's an edge community. They got together for a collective impact effort, and I'll touch on that shortly, where their purpose was to dramatically reduce poverty. But they had real problems in the beginning because they didn't know each other. They didn't have a lot of social capital. Surrey is an edge community, so they don't have lots of civic organizations. Vancouver has 8 Rotary organizations, they have 1. Vancouver has a strong history of parent-teacher councils, they don't. Vancouver people live there. In Surrey, they come in and they leave in the evening. They're not even of the community sometimes. And they were intimidated by the sheer complexity of poverty. So they said, let's actually reduce this dramatically, and let's focus on reducing the number of homeless day laborers. Let's shrink the change we're trying to make. We'll do some stuff, we'll get good at it, and we'll build some trust, and then we'll try something more sophisticated. Our vision's the same, but our starting point is much more modest. We're not going to plan our way out of this. And their MO was zoom in on and get a worm's eye view of what the issues are, and then zoom out and come out with programmatic and systems change interventions. So what did they do? They followed homeless day laborers because they said, we don't know anything of the problem. How are we ever going to come up with a solution? Ran alongside, did some research, and found out that the chief reason homeless day laborers were actually not in a shelter was because the shelter had a 40-year-old practice of requiring welfare receipt as a proxy for vulnerability. Right? 40 years ago it made sense. Now it doesn't, because 1 out of 2 Vancouverites who are poor are working. So they went to the shelters, intervention, and said, hey guys, would you maybe stop doing that? And they said, yeah, okay. It's pretty good. Reminds me of a guy who goes to the doctor and says, doctor, my arm hurts when I do this. And the doctor says, well, then don't do that. Oh, you guys, I'm running out of my jokes. I'm using some of my best material here. So they changed that. Then they back up and they said, let's keep watching. We're peeling away the onion. We got one problem, one solution, let's keep going. The next thing they find out is temp agency workers are actually working on construction sites getting ready for the Olympics. And people come to a temp agency and they hire a bunch of workers, and the workers go and clean up the sites, and they come back in the late evening because they clean up during the evening. As they come back, they're finding out that these workers the temp agencies get 16 to 18 bucks an hour. The temp workers are getting 8 to 9 bucks an hour. It's a 50% call on the wage. So what do? They actually run to the companies and they say, Could you switch that? And they actually sit down and they negotiate with the companies, and the company said, no, here's our business plan. They show them the business plan and the numbers. It's a marginal company to begin with. It's a marginal business. It's not that lucrative. So they actually can't pressure the company to change their practices. So they try again, and they go to the nonprofit agencies and saying, you're already working with these folks in the first place. Would you fulfill the intermediary function and let them keep the full wages? They said, sure. What happens? Wages double overnight. They keep going. They find out right away as they're running alongside this intervention that construction companies can't give the workers automatic deposit because they don't have a bank account. Now, how come they don't have a bank account? They don't have, they don't have a location, all that kind of stuff. Simple problem, isn't it? Not so much, not in Canada. Go to the big banks. The big banks are kind of impervious. The local managers don't have a lot of control. They can't change national policy. So they go to the local credit union and they create affordable products for financial products for the working poor. Then they get into housing. This is the last part of the tale. And then they find out that people who get into housing, 50% after 1 year go back to the streets. Chief reason? Chief reason is a house is not a home. I'm missing my friends. I'm stressed. I'm trying to change a lot of things. I go home. I don't have friends. My networks are in the streets. They don't say social capital, but networks. So the intervention is next intervention is how do you create social networks for people in the Housing First program. Long story short, did we start off with a strategy? We started off with an idea. The strategy emerged through a process of trial and error. Everything we tried, we learned more about the nature of the problem, the challenge, and what may or may not work. There was lots of things that didn't work in that strategy. Did we slow down in saying we failed? No. It was instantaneous adaptation. Zooming in on the issue, zooming out on the response. This, we think, at least these three things, participatory, zoom in, zoom out, and be highly experimental and adaptive, are core to the adaptive leadership. And I want to actually add one other thing. That program went from a probe to a prototype, turned into a pilot project. You guys have pilots here? Pilot project junkies like us? Then went to a program and then changed policy, iteratively. That program worked terrifically for a long time, but guess what happened in 2012? The Olympics are finished. Construction industry goes whoop. The general framework is the same, but we lose a key pillar, the construction industry. So we keep housing first, we keep the shelter policy, we keep the financial asset building, right? But then we have to create a new adaptive response to replace the construction industry, and then they start doing it with part-time labor around the forestry industry, right? All solutions on complex issues have a half-life. They work for a while and then they don't. So we don't hold on to it forever. We hold on to it for as long as it works, and then when context shifts, we adapt. Adaptive means, maybe I summarize it in the following way. Not plan the work, work the plan, but act, react, adapt, act, react, adapt, act, react, adapt, until we find productive patterns, and then we hold on to them. Act, react, adapt is also a strategy of small bets before big bets, right? Why bet big when you don't know what's going on? Bet small, get grounded, fail small, fail fast, all that kind of stuff, and then when we get more confidence that we actually know what we're talking about, and we have a better ideas of what may or may not work, then we start betting bigger. There's a discipline between of small bets before big bets. Okay, number 3. We know this stuff about collective, complex issues. Collective impact is a framework that, if complexity is a foundational idea, collective impact is a certain way of thinking about how to navigate through complexity on a complex issue. Think of it as a navigational frame where we said this morning it is imperfect. It's just a very good start, but the field is elaborating quite a bit, so I don't even think the way we framed it in a couple of years is going to look the same. But it's a very good opening move. So Sherry, I only got 2 slides for this, but I want to make sure. Here's the normal story. I don't know if you've seen this slide before. Makes an important point that we're all doing good work anyways, but we're all generating isolated impact. It's important. It has nothing to do about how well we're doing things. When I gave you the CODA story at the beginning of the day, CODA was making very good isolated impact. It's an important contribution, and we still need to make impact at that level. This is not saying no to organizations doing work. But this makes intuitive sense. Collective impact is saying, let's change the story a little bit, captured by a quote by Francis Ford Coppola, who said, you know Francis Ford Coppola, the Godfather, made some good movies, also made some stinkers. Does anyone see Godfather 3? He should have been put in prison for Godfather 3. No, honestly, it's the worst. It just drove me, I see I'm getting angry just talking about it. 1 and 2 were brilliant. 3 was such a dog show. It was so terrible. Anyways, the difference between a good movie and a bad movie, he said, easy. The difference is in a good movie, everyone's making the same movie. Are we making the same movie in our community? You have a version of your first plot line in Go Goldfields. So are we making the same movie? It requires us to make shifts from specialized agendas to common agenda, from fragmented measurement systems to shared measurement systems, independent activities, people doing their own thing, to ones that are mutually reinforcing, that end up more than the sum of their parts, from sporadic communication to continuous communication, and trying to do this off the side of our desks by having some backbone support. You've seen this, you've heard this, I don't want to go into it too much, but this is the basic storyline. Even though in a car driving down here, I certainly would like to upgrade some of these things on the right-hand side, but they're directionally correct. Anyone seen this for the first time?
I think as an image like that, yes, but we've talked a lot about all of that, like
those conditions.
Yeah, we've talked about that this sort of side of it more so than.
So not just a new framing of it. Yeah. I don't want to introduce anything new. I just want to confirm this is the foundational idea that around which we're going to tell some case studies. You don't like unsupported efforts, do you? Okay, Kev. I'm going to give you 3 quick examples of this, and then introduce the adaptive cycle to illustrate this. And I'm actually deliberately didn't take stuff around early childhood development or other things. I took these because they're roughly similar, and they help me make a point about this thing called the adaptive cycle. Anyone been to Calgary? Yeah? What do you know about, what's your impression of Calgary?
It's a big country town. I missed the Stampede. They had the Olympics there. I went down the luge. That was pretty...
You went down the luge?
Yeah, frightening.
When was this?
2006.
Legally you went down?
Yeah, I was,
Okay.
tandem.
Oh, terrific.
Yeah.
But country town, right? Cowboy town?
Yeah.
What's the industry?
Cattle, oil.
Yeah, oil and gas. That's our Dallas, Texas. I'm from the north of that. So oil and gas, in 2006, numbers of homelessness on the street begin to rise. Why? Boom town, oil and gas is going up again. Condo conversions, price of real estate goes up, everything goes up. Homelessness on the rise. Calgary business says not good for branding. Social justice crowd says not good for people. Calgary business triggers it, and they say we are going to do something about this. They come up with Canada's first 10-year plan to end homelessness at a municipal level. We steal from the Americans, like we always do. R&D is not research and development in Canada. It's rob and duplicate from the Americans. But we try and make it, give it our own curl. We create a 10-year plan to end homelessness like the 60 that exist in the United States. What's the strategy built on? Something called Housing First. Do you guys play with Housing First? Housing First is, it turns strategy upside down. Traditional housing is transitional housing. You have issues, mental health issues or addictions issues, we'll get you into a temporary shelter. Then we're going to get you into a transitional shelter. And then you work your way up. Housing First says, forget that, put people in homes now. And deal with that other stuff later. It's too hard to deal with it the other way. Some research behind it, they bet the whole plan on it. They come up with a detailed 10-year plan that every year they show the number of housing units being built, where they're going to be on integrated services. It is a full-fledged plan the work, work the plan. And why does it work? Because Calgary is very much an engineering town, management-oriented. They love that stuff. Here's one of their key measures. Sharon, can you read this?
By 2018, no person will spend more than 7 days in an emergency shelter before moving to a safe, decent, affordable home with the support needed to sustain it.
So this is sort of an intermediate thing. They're saying this is one of many intermediate goals. If we can do these things, The cumulative effect is we're going to see dramatic reductions in homelessness. Here's some other features. Calgary is loaded. It's a rich town. So Melbourne, anyone from Melbourne here? No? What's the United Way campaign in Melbourne? Do you know how much they raise a year? No, it's significant. Calgary is a city of a quarter the size or a third the size, and their campaign is $54 million a year they raise. Right? It's loaded. They got more money than some small countries. So they pour all their money into the Calgary Homelessness Foundation, and they create this management information system. So in some ways, guys, if you're looking for a classic plan the work the plan collective impact effort, it's Calgary. And they do the plan, and it's executed extraordinarily well because Calgary's got good execution culture. Here's where we are. Oh, here's their homeless management system. $4 to $6 million to create that thing.
I read somewhere that it was, they were spending more money on their drug rehabilitation and stuff like that than they were actually spent to house a person.
There's lots of stories like that because what happens? They bet big. So what happens when you bet big? You execute big and you succeed big and you fail big, right? So they executed well. Lots of stuff worked, lots of stuff didn't. Here's where they are in 2014. Impressive, eh? Now, you have to dig beneath the numbers here to understand what's going on. The population of Calgary in that time increased 200,000 people. 10,000 units were lost to condo conversions. They are only at halfway pace they're getting of new affordable units. Wages go through the roof again because it's boom culture, and now oil's dropped to 30 bucks a barrel. In Calgary, oil's 11 bucks a barrel because our crude is dirtier. So all these things have changed. They're moving in a fast-moving context. They executed relatively well. They bet big. Lots of stuff worked. Lots of stuff didn't. And homelessness decreased by 1%, but they actually turned the curve. So if they would have let the curve go like this, it would have been this. So it's not this, but it went like this. It plateaued. So in some ways, they did move the needle. But now they have to go and revisit their plan dramatically. They're at the end of their 10-year plan. Here's what they accomplished. I'm going to show you two more quickies. I just gave you Surrey's case study. I'm not going to repeat it again. Did they do a big plan? No? How did they do it?
They sort of did like a plan to study action, like a very quick turnaround.
They did. They did a little project, and then they started building heavier on the plan. That's how they started with that project I just shared with you. Here's where they are 2015. This is how we end poverty in Surrey. 4 big thematic areas. They've got a very grumpy city council on board, and they got a pretty elaborate plan. And British Columbia is the last province in Canada not to have a poverty reduction strategy. All of them do. And they're a key player in nudging him toward it. They moved from a group of people who could barely work together, not because they didn't like each other. No, they just didn't know each other. Right? They couldn't handle sophisticated things yet. Were they incapable? They were very capable. They just were learning how to work together. They were learning how to build the same movie. Look at their movie now. Pretty impressive 9 years later. I think that's utterly impressive. Let me give you one more. Poverty in Edmonton. Did you make it to Edmonton? Okay. Different town?
Yeah.
Different town. It's my town, so I'm not going to ask you.
I stayed at the university there.
Oh, U of A.
Yeah.
It's my school. Okay, we'll talk about it over lunch. They start off wanting to reduce poverty, but they also start off small. They say, let's just start with working poor because no one's paying attention to working poor in Edmonton. Let's just go for 1,000 families. And we're going to learn a lot. And in fact, their original theory of change is they're going to create an innovation pipeline for services for the working poor because no one serves them. Right? Is Australia like that? If you're unemployed, you have more services. If you're working poor, they're not as robust. So they actually have an innovation pipeline, and they're going to scale initiatives that work. They have terrific projects. Job buses for the working poor, headhunting services for the working poor, a bunch of initiatives that were just terrific. Their evaluation 2 years in comes up with the following recommendation, and we brought in a consulting company from the outside. Here's what they said. This is a classic example of execution excellence and strategy failure. Execution excellent. They took this strategy, they executed extraordinarily well. They are fast, they're innovative, they create partnerships like no one's business, right? They're really good on measurements, they do social return on investment on anything that moves, right? So they're extraordinarily good, but their theory turns out to be the wrong one. They made a slightly bigger bet than Surrey. Surrey was doing little theories, like little bets. This was a slightly bigger one. So they actually said, we're going to change our strategy. 2 years in, we're actually going to cut poverty in one half in 2 vulnerable neighborhoods. And they came up with the new strategy. That's the goal. Creating a workforce development pipeline from the inner city of Edmonton to the industrial donut, that is Edmonton, where everything's on the outside, the world's second biggest industrial park because of the oil sands. And customized training, affordable tax credit, boom, boom, boom. They work on it, it implodes. They run out of gas, they're too tired. They go to sleep for 3 years because they're frustrated. Does the vision die? Nope. Is it sleeping? Yep. Here's where they are at 2015. Sharon, can you read out what our mayor said?
We're trying to do nothing less than change the world.
Everyone's on board in the city of Edmonton now, including to the point where Edmonton and Calgary mayors are backing the most conservative province in Canada. Look what kind of experiments we might be engaging in right away. Have you guys talked about guaranteed income? They tried that. You wouldn't get? Now, I'm not going to argue for or against it, but what I am going to say, this is a good illustration of people giving a rip, right? For a conservative province, for mayors to even be talking about stuff, you know there has been culture shift, right? And they did it in Winnipeg. They just say, look, you're going to get a big guaranteed income no matter what. We're going to stop watching you with all these social services, right? Like watchdog stuff. You get this amount of money for sure, no matter what. Now, here's what I wanted to do with the last part of this. Those 3 quick stories. Okay, I got it. Is this idea that collective impact initiatives unflow in a linear path, I think purely linear is a problem for us as a field. This is one of the early learnings. I think it creates undue stress and doesn't unleash potential of communities in the way that it could, and the temperature for performance is too high. Collective impact efforts are high risk, high reward. High risk, high effort. It takes a lot to do this. Isn't it just easier to go back into where the light is? And there's no guarantee in these things. I just showed you Calgary for a reason. Calgary's excellent. It hasn't worked out in the same way. So it's not an issue of money, it's not an issue of capability, it's even a pretty good strategy. But we can get pretty good outcomes if and when the conditions are right. So I want to show you this last thing. The adaptive loop and the performance loop. Where the light is, we do something this really well. We birth something, we grow it, and it hits maturity, and then what we want to do is sustain it. That's where actually the original collective impact thinking is. Mapped out quite different. We think there is a backward loop that is inherent, endemic in all collective impact efforts, even in collective impact projects and work groups that are important to the overall health of an initiative, and we have to steward that backward loop as strongly as the forward loop. If we don't steward this backward loop well, as I'll show you right away, we won't get a strong performance loop. So here it is. The maturity phase. We have a model of working, a project, a department, a school system, a corporate, a forestry company, etc., the automotive industry, but let's think collective impact for the moment, where this zone is almost like its own country. Efficient, certainty, stability, focus on conserving patterns, hierarchy, rules, policies, procedures, standardization, predictability, low tolerance for risk. This is performance engine time. And we love when collaborations or organizations or projects are in that zone. Why? Because they produce outcomes in a predictable way. Programs are like that, hopefully. You feel that? You ever been in one of those zones and then experienced this? Declining outcomes? You're in a system and all of a sudden it starts not producing like it used to. Sometimes you get hard data for this and sometimes it's just your gut instinct. Why are we not getting as good data? Well, usually we don't admit it in the first round because we stay in our head and we say the following things. the model is fine, we just need to work harder. Been there?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's fine, just work harder. Well, then you'd say, well, the model is fine, we have to incrementally innovate a little bit better. We got to muck around on the sides, refine it, but the model's fine, right? I think about this around education sometimes. The third one is, the model is fine, we just need more resources, right? Could we get more resources, please? But the model is fine, don't talk about the model, we just need more resources. Well, maybe we get all that kind of stuff, but the needle continues to turn. Then we go to the final one, the model is fine, but you're screwing up. You're screwing up, you're screwing up. You're not focusing hard enough. You're not being accountable, so we go into hyper-accountability mode. Well, maybe, just maybe, this model did what it could do, right? It did what it could do. The context shifted on us so much, the times are different, or we're asking that model to do stuff it was never designed to do in the first place. Calgary is like that. Calgary is over here with their model. It worked that first iteration, but then the context shifted again and again and again. We found out the limits of housing first. All these things have shifted, and there's no more incrementing with that Calgary strategy. They have done what they can do with that strategy. We have to go through the next phase. Anyone ever been in this phase, the release phase? Sometimes it's called creative destruction. It's called creative destruction because it's the thing, the model is released, destroyed in a way, in order for new things to emerge. And we'll talk about this shortly. Unless we let go of things, nothing new is going to emerge. And the release phase is actually quite emotional and problematic. I don't deal with it very well because I'm repressed. But it is about grief and letting go and anger and blame. It's a hard, bloody thing to manage in a collaboration, actually, or in your life. Never mind. Or a system. We're letting go, but if we manage these stages of grief, we actually get to a neutral zone where we've actually let go of the past and we're ready for something new to emerge, and then we get to go up this curve. The looking forward place. Ever feel that? Yeah? We get to go forward, then we go into this zone. This is the exploration or the discovery zone. Surrey started here, didn't they? What was Surrey discovering and exploring? A very modest project. They were trying to do a big project. Then they got weirded out and they said, let's do a small project. Let's actually try something quite small, little experiments and options, and build up a sense of how we're going to do stuff, because at the end of this exploration phase, where effectiveness is not performing at a high level. That's top right stuff. We're not there yet. Effectiveness is getting insights about what it is we're trying to do, building a little social capital to be able to do it, and then the final one, feeling confident enough to place bets. Your strategy up on the wall there, and I see, that's a bet. That's you're saying these are the right things to start with at the right time. We kind of think these indicators are pretty good. We like these pathways. That's all it is a bet. I think it's a good bet. It's a nicely presented bet. I love that. But that's all it is a bet. And then you do this. We go through this phase, a highly adaptive development phase, where you have a framework, but then you actually give it texture. You start thinking with your hands. You act, react, adapt, act, react, adapt. Is it not a little bit entrepreneurial? Is it not a little bit full of trial and error, hyper flexible, because you don't have a pattern yet? You're trying to create a pattern. You're trying to find something that works. And just like an entrepreneur who starts a business and makes 35 mistakes, but you can't tell them that because they move so quickly that by the time you say, hey, you screwed up here, they've already made 3 more and have already adapted and internalized the learning. This is nothing except trial and error. And then sooner or later it begins to stabilize, and then it goes into this mode here where you start refining it and it goes up. Surrey started here, started a project that allowed them to get to their strategy now. Edmonton went here. What was their first consultant's report? Implementation excellence, strategy failure. They backed up, they rebooted, they came out with another one. The 2 poverty in the neighborhoods by half. They stalled, and then whoom, they are now in early development mode on a much bigger, more ambitious project than they had the first time. This thing takes place on multiple scales. Here's an education example. if you're doing, imagine a teacher who's been teaching the same way for 40 years in a classroom, in a school administration that is just opening up in the development phase, in a reorganizing ministry, etc. We're managing in collective impact, we're working at multiple scales. Projects, collaborations, theme areas, systems, and we have to pay attention to all of those. Sometimes big systems shape what we do here. Sometimes when systems are really innovative, on the bottom, we start putting pressure on the big systems. Guys, I'm just going to stop there. 2 questions for you. First of all, in your group, when you look at that, where in this adaptive cycle do you get the most energy as a person? Meaning it energizes you, you like the work. And where do you get tired? And it doesn't mean you can't do it, it just means it takes energy away from you. It's not your preferred state. Just quickly get an assessment of where you are on that, okay? We're doing great for time. Let's just do a quick scan here. Who feels most energized in the top right? You feel top, yeah? What do you like about the top right?
The predictability and your delivery is very predictable of a high standard and reflects on you.
Yeah, it's like working like clockwork. Yeah, we need, by the way, some people feel this is a kind of a oblique way of dismissing top right work. It's not. When we get top right work in our worlds, you were mentioning you crave it, it's great to have, right? It's beautiful to have. We are looking for high performance, so that's important. Who feels more comfortable on the left-hand side, exploration or development? Okay, terrific. What do you like about it?
I just find my motivation is much higher. I actually feel very restricted in maturity. I feel, I'm much more constrained, whereas but I work with a lot of people who struggle in that other space as well because they feel it's not concrete enough, it's not certain enough. It's like they can feel frustrated, they can feel like there's no action, we're just spending this time developing, exploring.
Yep.
What's it going to
Spinning. Yep. Thank you. Anyone else want to reveal why they like the left-hand side?
It's no rules
There are,
necessarily.
or fewer rules.
It's a greenfield site.
Yeah.
You're not compared with anything. You're just
Yeah.
allowed to start creating or thinking or whatever.
Yeah, you're right. It's much more emergent. In fact, if we had more time, I would talk about what emergent strategy looks like. Because I think part of the challenge is there is discipline in each of these areas. It's just a traditional discipline is considered an accountability to the top right. Now, let's just say, and I'm top right, by the way, what happens if we bring top right instincts to this process?
You close your doors, you wouldn't be creative.
We close down fast, right? It doesn't allow this to emerge. What happens if we bring this kind of stuff to top right work? There's some adaptation, so it's good to keep nudging, but we have a high performance engine going. And I know that I work with a very brilliant mentoring group in Edmonton, and they have someone who likes this work. And they have one of the most sophisticated volunteer recruitment strategies in North America. They're so good at it. And this person in the bottom left can't help themselves. They always want to take it apart. They want to tinker. Let's try this, we'll try this. It's one of the few things that's stable in the organization. It's excellent. So they always get told, shut up, right? Next year you can muck around with it. So the issue is situational leadership again. When what does discipline and what do the processes look like here? The discipline processes. Get good at this. Because here's the secret of this, and then we're going to do the last section. If we don't have a good backward loop, we're going to have not much here on the forward loop, right? So we have good stewards of collective impact at a project level, at a thematic area level, and a overall level. We're managing this process all the time. That's our job to steward that. To give you a quick example, I just finished an evaluation of a collective impact effort in Winnipeg with 3 levels of government supporting First Nations urban governance. We just did an assessment, and here's where they said they are with the overall collective impact effort. They are in the early days of development. They're developing and adapting their network, and their 4 thematic areas, you have 3, are at different stages. The employment one shut down. All the stuff happening in the federal government, the freeze went on there, shut down the group entirely, had nothing to do with the group. The feds shut it down. Number 2, the health group was embracing something they called relentless incrementalism. They have so many changes going on in their sector, their code word is, our org chart is made from Velcro. That they're saying, we can't think big yet, it's just too hard because things keep changing, but we're relentless, this and then this, shared measurement system project, they're doing all these stuff just relentlessly, and it's quite impressive. The housing group is stalled, I forgot why, I can't remember, and the education group just flew forward at 1,000,000 miles an hour. They've already done their first cycle of 50 different initiatives, right? And are getting ready to mine and distill them and get ready for another cycle, which may include a lot of the initiatives in the first cycle. They're moving at different paces. You feeling this so far, guys? Okay.
Is that because of the bureaucratic systems involved with funding and stuff?
There's a lot. We could peel away the onion.
Restriction in housing.
This one is heavily influenced by the machinery of the provincial and federal government. But if you were to do this for all groups, the choice would be, where are we now, and what is the story behind this part of the adventure? Because all of them have different stories. If we took the federal, state level stuff out of here, we'd still have them all over the place for different reasons. People move, you don't know how fast, you can move through this slow or quick. Some groups, when we did Vibrant Communities, we had 10 years of funding. We had groups go through this 4 times. Boom, boom, boom. We had one group never get out of here. Right? In fact, Edmonton was one of them. Boom, boom, they were excellent, just luck. You know, the wrong bet, and then they blew past everyone in this latest round. Because they had enough social capital and commitment to the vision that when the timing was right, the windows open up, they ran through. Okay, last one, guys. I want to talk about traps in the adaptive cycle. Why? Because you as stewards have to navigate traps. You as participants help your colleagues work through traps. These stages are one thing. They each require different kinds of leadership. Trying to get through these bugger little traps is yet another. So here's the 4 traps. We know we have to let go, but we're stuck in a rigidity trap. Number 1. Number 2, we let go and we want to move forward, but we're in the chronic disaster trap. Number 3, we went through exploration. We want to place a bet to go through development, and we have a scarcity trap. And the last one, we got something going. It seems to have a good rhythm. We like it. We want to sustain it or to scale it. And we have something called the parasitic trap. Okay? Here's the issue. These traps exist. They are a pain in the butt. Our job is to acknowledge them, to improve the probabilities that we get through them, but have the discipline not to push too hard if we're not ready to go to the next phase. It takes discipline not to move forward sometimes, like Edmonton. Do you think it was easy for them to say no? To shut down? You know, that was hard. But they said, what's the point of keeping going? This strategy ain't going to get us there. So it takes the discipline to not go forward. Anyone a plumber here? You know, you have traps in the plumbing system. They exist for a reason, right? So let's take a quick look at these traps. Rigidity trap, top right corner. We know we want to let go, but we can't because we're stuck in old institutional patterns and arrangements. Why? Because the top right, that's performance engine culture. What's performance engine culture? Deliver, 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 predictability, 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 no risk, no risk, no risk, performance, performance, performance. For someone and for machinery supporting that who said, please let go, that looks terrible. It looks terrible to let go. Would you agree? When someone says perform, particularly if you got a lot of pressure to perform because there's people beating on your doors, you got tons of kids who need good education, you'd say, I don't have downtime. Same thing with too big to fail. You ever experienced that one in Australia? The collective impact effort, or the big bangs of the United States, they are too big to go down. We can't afford some creative destruction or release. They're too big because the implosion will be catastrophic. Sometimes we create collective impact efforts or even expectations that are so big, you can't let it go through renewal, even a little piece of it, because it's so big. This should just be self-interest. Ever been in a project where, ever run an organization, we'd say, this program should go, but I pay bills with this. I keep my lights on, I pay staff, right? I have my professional identities wrapped up with this. My organization leads on this kind of thing. It's hard to let go when you have self-interest in keeping a pattern going. And finally, this last one, we are unclear about what we might invest in as a collective impact effort. We are so caught up in the top right, we've done no R&D in the backward loop. Right? We haven't done any work. So when you'd say, what would you release and start investing in, you'd say, I don't know. So what do? You hold on even tighter because you don't know what you would invest in. These making sense, guys? They're kind of self-evident, eh? Imagine all of them together, how hard it is to let go. Let's say we let go, and then we're going through the bottom loop, and we want to move forward. Then we have the privilege of trying to navigate this little puppy. This is the chronic disaster trap. Like a car fishtailing out of the parking lot, we can't seem to get traction to move forward. Why? Lots of reasons. First of all, if we've just released something, we're putting fires out all the time anyways. You've just let go, people are upset, boom, 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 you're putting out fires. People come and go, the context keeps moving on you, and finally some people are so tired of that that they crawl back up into the maturity phase because at least they knew what that was. Right? At least it was known. So rather than move forward, they just say, I can't hack it and I want to go back. We've been there. I'm like that with diets. Okay, let's say we go through the exploration phase. We want to make a bet on something, some kind of project or collective impact thing. We're ready to do something and we want to invest in it, but we have a scarcity. A scarcity of what? Could be resources. There's not enough money to invest in this. Ever been there? We've all been there, but let's talk about the paradox, the irony. We got lots of resources in maturity. Are we ever going to have this much money again in human services systems in Western culture? I know there's not enough, right? There never is. But do we think we've ever even had it dramatically better? There are cuts. It's amazing how much resources are locked into conservation patterns. So, sometimes we don't have enough money, sometimes it's locked in. Number two, sometimes, someone was getting at you earlier, I think. We want to move forward, but people are asking for a level of certainty and prediction and stability that we can't give them at that stage. Ask Surrey to tell them, are you going to get those 200 homeless day laborers off? And how are you going to do it? What does Surrey tell you? Go away. Sorry?
I will search the internet for you.
That's right. Let me tell you something that triggers a check release, but still lets me be highly emergent. You're right. Sometimes we can't show that level of certainty. The final one is, I like this one the most, sometimes the stuff that we're trying to launch isn't all that compelling. We didn't really do a good job in the renewal loop. Have you ever done an organizational development plan that says, we got to transform this organization? Same people, same processes, same funders, same structure, nothing was released. Nothing was released. You did it in a 2-day weekend, a formalized, credentialized strat planning thing, and then you finish it and you go, this looks a hell of a lot like what we just have. Right? Well, of course, nothing released. We didn't release, we didn't explore. So when we come on something to bet, you think, that's not so exciting. That's a challenge. Last one. Parasitic trap. The parasitic trap is we've gone through development, we've stabilized something, we like it for some whatever reason, we want to sustain it or scale it. We have the parasitic trap. We were at Michelle talking about this in the car, and Marley. The trap is the thing that we want to grow, sustain or grow, is parasitic on the hosts or the conditions that gave it birth. Sometimes it's the charismatic personality or the key personality. Sharon went to, she got all hippie on us and she now lives in Bali, right? She left, right?
No, it's not a bad scenario.
No, but if she did, then people go, well, Sharon knew everybody and she was the one who had the energy, and it was parasitic in a way on Sharon's relationships and personalities. This is not a bad thing. The paradox of collective impact is highly relational. This is a real issue. The relationship patterns help drive this stuff, so you need it, but you're also a little bit parasitic. So sometimes it's based on that. Anyone in a family business here? Family-owned business? Usually the first generation is okay, second generation kind of okay, third generation of keeping a family business on succession planning is tough, right? Because the first or second generation still kind of get it. The third generation struggles, not all the time. Flexibility of the development phase, that makes sense? It was so flexible in that development phase, and now you're asking me to codify it, and I can't. Experimentation resources, we're all pilot project junkies. There's money for experimentation, but not sustaining. And finally, it works in a unique context, time, or scale. In Canada right now, if you want to work on homelessness, the windows are still open. In 3 years from now, it may be family violence or something else. That's equally important, slightly different, but the windows of opportunities might be closing on homelessness. It may work well in neighborhood A or community A, but it may not work well in neighborhood B. It may work in a big school, but it may not work in a small school. Or conversely, it works really well in a small school, but it struggles in a big school, right? The context is different. I think we're doing... Guys, since we started at 20 after, can I grab 10 more minutes? Just go over. Can I ask you quickly to reflect on this? What traps, if any, are you experiencing in your collective impact effort? This is not a planning session. Just see if any of them speak to you. I'm going to go back up and show you the traps. And we won't do a plenary. I just want to see if these things are relevant to you. Okay, here we go. Take a 5 minutes. Any of these traps do you think you're experiencing? And all, just to let you know, if you're not experiencing them, I'm going to write up this story because I've never met a collective impact effort that have not experienced multiple traps.
Call them out, or are we doing it on a table?
Yeah, just at your table. Just.
I think the scarcity trap in terms of humans.
Yep.
So actually people who are willing to give their time to put in an effort towards it.
A lot of work, right?
And also the,
Especially those of us who can't use it as part of their job.
yeah.
So some people are here as a work student, so they've got someone that's here that's getting paid their work, whereas other people give them their time and not getting paid for it because that's not the kind of job that it is. So I think that's a...
That's big. Thank you. Our typical trap. You were jumping in?
Along the same lines, except I still think in some areas we might not have the breadth that we want, so scarcity and resource in terms of the depth.
Diversity, depth, yeah.
Yeah.
Just on the human capital side, yeah. That's a good one. In fact, that's a very important one. Lots of groups, for example, in Canada right now are caught up on this idea of prototyping as an early stage piece of work, which is good. We don't know how to do prototyping. Like, that's an easy word to use. It's actually quite a hard thing to do. Lots of people say we need content expertise on some of these things, and we don't have them. So I love that. Human capital in terms of paid and non-paid, just depth and diversity of experience. Any other traps you might be experiencing?
The perceived lack of pace of change and trying to keep the energy going when when you see it's such a big project. And you probably talked about it a bit in keeping it small and having some quick wins, but just that lack of the perceived lack of pace.
Okay. At the level of the initiative or the context in which the initiative is unfolding?
Probably in the context.
Yeah. Actually, this is a very important thing. There's change fatigue in the world. I mean, in Canada there is, right? There's just so many things that are changing, and lots of people go into this, do you use this phrase TTSP? This too shall pass.
Yeah.
Right? It's just,
get a lot of that.
yeah, just go limp for a while, right? Just relax, and we'll see what survives, and then we'll invest in that, but there's too many things going on. So I actually think that's a real important thing. Were you also referring to perceived lack of progress in the CI, or just the busyness?
We attend lots of meetings and discussions.
Yeah, yes.
We're all working on it, and there's a tremendous sense of alignment.
Yeah.
And a greater understanding, and we're all making the same movie. But the movie isn't made yet.
Yeah.
Still barely writing the script.
Yeah.
Still,
Still barely writing the script.
yeah.
Yeah, Liam kept like No, he died in the dressing room.
Do you think, let me just test this. I actually think sometimes the script writing takes a long time because people are actually treating it like a complicated issue where they have to know a ton, right? And they have to have high levels of certainty about stuff to kind of go down the idealistic Calgary version, right? Plan the work the plan. When what the adaptive cycle allows is another option to say, no, go through quicker iterations that get more sophisticated over
I
time.
think we said that in the last meeting, we were kind of saying, well, I mean, like I said it, but regardless of that don't be scared to push through a pilot.
Right.
Especially on the small scale stuff, some of the families and children, so it's like, get that person to talk to that person, run it through if it works for 10 people, it works for 2, and just so that you can have the tangibleness of something being done, but also, because we've got ideas there that need that can be executed.
Yeah. By the way,
That's the good thing about the small ideas, the small bit.
before the big ones.
Yeah.
By the way, what I like about that example is in Surrey, the illustration is not only did they do a pilot, they didn't call it a pilot to begin with, but it turned into one. It was their platform for building strategy.
Yeah.
So what they did was they started building. The pilot was there, but they immediately turned around and said, "Now let's build a strategy around this." So it was an opening move of a strategy, not instead of a strategy. I'm not saying you were saying that, but this was how sophisticated they were, right? Start with something tangible, turn it into a first full-fledged iteration of strategy. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of focus on issues that might go across different areas of the project as well, where you're working with 4 separate groups. There might be different levels of investment, different understandings, and I'm thinking the words that are coming to my mind is almost like there's so much emphasis on getting it right and one model fits all that it might be starting, targeting something smaller and then learning from and then going, because it is a smaller community as well. So there's this wanting to have big impact, but also wanting to be doing things.
That's right.
Quickly.
Yeah, that's there's a great phrase, I'll send it to you, Sharon. It's about the pressure cooker of change in collective community change efforts. The pressure between good process and solid product. The tension between a long-term vision and some short-term results. The tension between doing it from the inside out to requiring sometimes outside-in support. And they actually have this metaphor of the pressure cooker. Have you heard this metaphor? Where you can look at all these tensions, you feel them, and you actually use them productively, because you'd say you actually need those tensions. Because if you don't pretend like a pressure cooker, if the tensions get too high, then the pressure cooker blows. Your container that you've created blows. But if there is no tension, you just say, let's do short term, or let's just do process, etc., then nothing cooks. So what you as a stewardship group is, you're trying to create the right pressure cooker to get people moving. How do you balance the urge for long-term outcomes with short-term learning-rich, momentum-building wins? Yeah. How do you balance really good process while moving efficiently to outcomes? So you create those questions, and how do you answer it? I don't know, but you want that tension, right? That's what drives you forward. Yeah.
I think, I'm not talking about this project, so I think for me anyway, that crossover is really important, because I can see how easily you get stuck in both circles, just going around.
You could.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could. That's again the leadership skill, knowing when to push through, when to not, when to back up. Yeah. Guys, we're at time here, so I'm just going to say we touched on traps, that I want to reinforce that some people get bummed out by traps. I don't. I like to say, at least I know that we know they're there. Our job is to acknowledge them, improve the probabilities that we get through them, but have the discipline to push through them if we are not ready. It could be counterproductive to push through something prematurely. They exist for a reason, these traps. Here are the main ideas again, and then last small group chat. If we were to do it all again, the second mouse gets the cheese tour, I wish this stuff would have been firmly embedded in our head. I think we would have had a stronger, vibrant community, even though it was pretty good. We would have said right away, these are complex, not simple issues. Please don't ask us to do simple things on steroids. Please do not let us work in the dark side of the parking lot, not get pulled back to the light all the time. We would have told funders this. We would have said to funders the following thing. You want us to do simple, predictable things? That I can do that, but that's like a low yield bond. It's predictable, but don't pretend I can give you excellent results if you invest in a low yield bond. Investing in the dark side of the parking lot is a high effort, high risk, high return equity investment. You expect lots of failures, lots of things that don't work out. It takes some time. You better be watching your investment closely to understand how things emerge, but the returns are higher. And then you'd say, we don't think you're ready for high yield, high risk investments. We will try and find some low yield stuff, but don't ask for high yield. And then they say, what do you mean we can't do high yield, high risk stuff? Reverse marketing. You'd say, are you sure you can do it? Do reverse marketing. Don't fall into the trap of promising the stuff on the dark side of the parking lot with low risk. Number 2, adaptive responses. Yes, it is discipline to be participatory, to zoom in out and zoom in, and to be experimental and adapt. There's a discipline in that. Number 3, collective impact is a very useful framework for navigating complexity, but imperfect, but still helpful. Gave you a couple of case studies that reinforced that the adaptive cycle, with its traps and its phases, is a nice lens to help stewarding these efforts to tackle complex issues. There's more. Why don't we finish with this last thing and then we can close and go for lunch. I always think of these things, you just heard a lot. The tide's now going out on the beach. Something's left on the beach for you. Might be a thought, an emotion. You might be thinking, oh, I'm scared. Or you might be thinking, I wish I would have went somewhere else 2 hours ago because I'll never get these 2 hours back. You may have an insight or something, just what's left on the beach for you, an aha, a feeling, or a thought after these 2 hours. By the way, it doesn't even have to be about collective impact because some of this stuff is relevant to all our work beyond collective impact. Have a go at it. Let's see what you come up with. Time here. We started a little bit late, so thanks for going a little bit over. This was not a planning session, and this was just me sharing some insights that I hope are helpful to you. But since we're not planning, we won't go into depth, do any kind of plenary. Is anyone open to sharing if they had something that popped up for them today that they thought was highly relevant for your next iteration of your work here in your collective impact effort? This is the participation part of the whole thing. Yeah.
I guess I was reassured with some of it that what we've been doing and been talking about fits so much with what you've talked about today already. So it's kind of nice, I guess, to be reassured that we're sort of on the right path, if you like.
Affirmation.
Yeah, but I think that it's perhaps also given us a bit of, I don't know, I guess maybe enthusiasm to take a bit of a leap about actually doing something. Like we've done a lot of talking, but it would actually be nice to do something.
Yep.
Or put something in place and sort of take a bit of a leap with that.
Good. Thank you. That's great.
Definitely that first one, the difference between simple and complex and appreciating the complex nature of the problems, but then being brave and going, well, what are these complex pieces? Let's try and put some words around them. Perhaps some best practices. And not the only community in the world that has unemployment and domestic violence and low literacy rates, etc.
Yep.
And we're not the only community in Australia that has these things either.
By the way, when I send this, I'll send some links. There's little exercises for people to do planning and mapping of where things are in the complexity matrix and where they are in the adaptive cycle. They're excellent planning tools. Even better, they're excellent conversation tools to say, you think we're in maturity? And you'd say, I don't think we're in maturity. And there's structured ways of doing that that then allow you to say, where do we want to be 18 months from now? and someone says, oh, I kind of want to move this from exploration to early development. So what do we need to do that? So I'll share that with you. I think they're great planning tools. Ma'am?
So can you use that in your evaluation too as part
I do it all the time. Yeah, in fact, this urban Aboriginal strategy, I used it as a way, just one part of it, to make sense of where the groups were in their collective impact journey. And then we still did evaluations of the initiatives. And most importantly, then we fed it back and said, so what now? What does this mean for strategy? What's the next iteration? The group was right here. We said, what does it mean for, can we get over here with this strategy? Yeah, a feedback loop to drive strategy. Yeah. One more quote. Not a quote, but one more thought. Okay. Hey, thanks. I dumped a little bit of some Canadian stuff on you. Hopefully some of it was relevant. I'm going to be learning lots this afternoon when we talk about evaluation. I'm looking forward to that. Thanks for having me. Yeah.
I would greatly like to thank Mark Cabaj for coming today, and also Michelle and Marley from Opportunity Child for making a generous offer to bring Mark all the way from Canada. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Any consolation, Mark, I don't laugh at my jokes either.
Oh.